Hi, everybody. We are going to talk about some causes of the Civil War, and we are going to focus on free states versus slave states. So let's begin to read. Introduction. In the 1800s, many Americans moved west. However, they disagreed on how to settle the new territories. In 1861, these conflicting ideas helped cause the bloody Civil War between the northern and southern states. So by the mid 1800s, the United States had two distinct regions. The North included states in New England, the Middle Atlantic region, around the Great Lakes, and part of the Great Plains. Northerners busily built cities, factories, and railroads. Most Northern workers were free, not enslaved. The South included states south of the Ohio River and latitude of 36 degrees and 30 minutes north. This region had few factories or large cities, and most people lived on farms. On plantations, African American slaves planted and harvested crops. So, if we take a look at this map, if we look at our key, so we see that states formed by the Missouri Compromise of 1820. So that would be here, and here's the Missouri Compromise line. That's just one of the events that took place. We will talk about that later, but what I want to use this map for is I want you to look at the free states and territories, which are this purplish color. And if you'll notice, there are states here, and then we have territories. These are the Great Lakes. So when we talk about a territory, we are talking about an area that has not been um, established as a state. So it is just an area of land. It still belongs to the United States, but it is not considered its own governing state yet. And then the pink would be these states down below, which are called slave states. Now, in this area, would be the South, and this would be the North. And these areas are where you had slaves, and this is the northern area where you had free labor. So, free labor versus slave labor. And that's what we are going to talk about more. So, let's keep reading. The Southern way of life depended on slave labor. As the United States expanded westward, Northerners and Southerners bitterly disagreed about whether slavery should be allowed in the new territories and states. So, what they're saying is those areas that were in the North, the people that lived in the North, they didn't use slaves for labor and to help their economy. But in the South, they did use slaves. They were not free and they did not get paid for their labor. So that was to benefit their economy and their way of life. So in this picture here, we see a picture of a plantation, and the caption reads, "Many white Southerners depended on slaves to work their plantations. The root cause of Civil War was a dispute over slavery, but what else contributed to the Civil War?" So what we're going to focus on this week is the slavery component of it, and we will talk about the other issues at a different time. So let's read about differences grow between the North and the South. By the mid 1800s, people in the North and the South had developed different ways of life. As a result, sectionalism, which is a strong concern for local interest, developed in the North and the South. Sectionalism is a strong attachment to the local interest instead of those of the country. So, what we're going to talk about in this this passage is how did sectionalism divide America and bring both regions closer to conflict? So, this word, what it is describing is the idea that you are more concerned with what happens right around you or in a specific region or just how it's going to affect you. You're not thinking about how it's going to affect everyone else in the country. And this really began to divide between what was good for the nation and what was good for the South. So you had the North believing what they thought was good for the entire country, and then you had the South, what they believed as being good for them, and the economy as a whole nation would eventually flourish. So let's read about some of those discrepancies. In the North, new industries began to appear. Busy factories made all kinds of products, including new inventions such as the sewing machine. Cities grew as people came to the North to work in the factories. Canals and railroads made it possible for farmers, ranchers, and business owners to move goods over long distances. Factory owners in the eastern part of the nation shipped tools by railroads to the farmers living 1,000 miles to the west. Farmers in the western areas sent grain and other crops to feed the people in the eastern cities. So, if we're looking at the map, what that is talking about is in the factories here, they were manufacturing goods. So in the South, they grew cotton. That was the king of the South was called Cotton. And it was a raw good that was shipped to the North, and the North would manufacture it in its factories by creating, clothing and sacks and things of those that they could use and sell to better the US economy. So they're trying to say that there was a distinct difference between the North and the South in how they made their money, and then how they shipped that information, those products, so that the people over here on the East Coast could ship things to the West, and the West could, in turn, ship to the East. All of this activity attracted new immigrants from places such as Ireland and Germany. Workers in the North earned wages for their labor. They were free to choose their own jobs and were therefore called free labor. Different lifestyles led to different interests. Many Southerners worked on their own farms, but owners of these plantations used slave labor. By the mid 1800s, the most important plantation crop was cotton. The South's warm weather and rich soil had always been favorable for growing cotton. But until Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793, cotton growers didn't earn much money. They had to separate the seeds from the cotton by hand, which took a long time and many workers. Whitney's machine did this task quickly. After this invention, cotton became a valuable cash crop. And by 1860, Southern plantations grew 3/4 of the entire world's cotton. So, as cotton plantations spread, the South began to depend more than ever on having many slaves. Most Northerners didn't own slaves. They did not want to see slavery spread into the new territories in the West, but many white Southerners insisted that states had the right to choose whether or not their citizens could own slaves. They also insisted that they should be able to take their slaves with them wherever they settled. The North and the South had other disagreements as well, but slavery was one of the key issues that divided them. So here we see a picture of a factory, and the caption reads, "The factory shown here produced boots and shoes." It was one of the many factories in the North that needed workers. So here, these workers would be free labor. They were free to choose where to work, and they were paid. So, in short summary, the North and the South were fiercely divided over the spread of slavery. Most people in the North did not have slaves and wanted to keep slavery out of the new Western lands. Most white Southerners insisted on their right to own slaves and bring them into the West. Congress tried to keep the peace through the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850. In the end, these compromises failed because many disagreements, such as the passage of the Fugitive Slave Acts, the fighting in Kansas, and Abraham Lincoln's election as president. The South also disagreed with the actions of the abolitionists who were helping slaves escape through the Underground Railroad. So these are all different events that occurred that led up to the beginning of the Civil War. And we are going to focus on slavery, but these particular events also contributed to why we ended up in a civil war between the North and the South. And for the last paragraph, after Lincoln's election, 11 Southern states formed a new country. They called it the Confederacy. The Confederates took over federal forts in the South by attacking Fort Sumter on April 16, 1861. Its attack on Fort Sumter ended hopes that the Union could be restored peacefully. The Civil War had begun. So here we have a picture of another plantation, and its caption reads, "The cotton plantation owners became rich. They used slave labor to plant and harvest the crops." So when we talk about the dispute between the North and the South, one of the main things is, yes, it has to do with slavery, but it also has to do with taking away states' rights. So big government